In 2014, Ukraine was thrown into chaos as a political revolution turned violent, resulting in the annexation of Crimea by Russia and the outbreak of war in eastern Ukraine. The conflict has been ongoing for several years now, with both sides accusing each other of aggression and human rights violations. While it's easy to point fingers and lay blame, it's important to recognize that war has no winners. The impact of war is felt most acutely by civilians caught in the crossfire. Homes are destroyed, families are torn apart, and innocent lives are lost. It's heartbreaking to see the toll that this conflict has taken on the people of Ukraine, especially the children who have been forced to flee their homes and live in refugee camps. It's also important to acknowledge the sacrifices made by the brave men and women who fight in this conflict, on both sides. They are ordinary people who are called upon to do extraordinary things in the service of their country. It's difficult to say what the future holds for Ukraine and its people, or for Russia and its involvement in the conflict. But what is clear is that the impacts of this war will be felt for generations to come. War is a devastating and tragic experience, and it's our hope that someday the people of Ukraine can live in peace and prosperity. The current conflict between Russia and Ukraine is not a standalone issue. It has deep roots that trace back to the Cold War era and the geopolitical rivalries that defined that period. At the center of this story is the Warsaw Pact, a military alliance that was formed in 1955 between the Soviet Union and its Eastern European allies as a counterbalance to NATO. The pact was a key instrument of Soviet power projection in the region, and it allowed Moscow to extend its influence over countries such as Poland, East Germany, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia. But the end of the Cold War brought the Warsaw Pact to an end. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed, and the countries that had been under its sphere of influence began to assert their independence. This included Ukraine, which had been a Soviet republic but was now a sovereign state. However, the end of the Warsaw Pact did not bring an end to the tensions between Russia and the West. In fact, some argue that the breakup of the pact was the beginning of a new era of conflict between the two sides. In recent years, tensions have risen once again, and the conflict in Ukraine is a reflection of these broader geopolitical struggles. Many in Russia see the events in Ukraine as a direct challenge to their national security interests, and they believe that the West is responsible for stoking the unrest in the region. However, the conflict in Ukraine is a result of Russian aggression and expansionism. The annexation of Crimea and the ongoing support for separatist rebels in eastern Ukraine are seen as clear violations of international law and norms. Who is to blame for the conflict? It is clear that the situation in Ukraine is causing unrest not just in the region, but around the world. The tensions between Russia and the West are higher than they have been in years, and there are concerns that the conflict in Ukraine could spark a larger, more dangerous conflict. The economic consequences of the conflict are also significant. The ongoing sanctions imposed on Russia by the West in response to its actions in Ukraine have had a major impact on the Russian economy. At the same time, the conflict has disrupted trade and investment in Ukraine, further damaging an already struggling economy. In conclusion, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine is a complex issue that cannot be understood in isolation. It has deep roots in the Cold War era and the geopolitical struggles that defined that period, and it is causing unrest both in the region and around the world. As we look for a way forward, it is important to consider the broader context of this conflict and to work towards a resolution that takes into account the interests of all parties involved.